Well, in what could be a heated session tomorrow, President Cyril Ramaphosa due to face questions in a hybrid session of the National Council of Provinces. That will take place in the afternoon. Well, let's stay then with the story. Prof Calland is Associate Professor of Public Law at the University of Cape Town. Professor Calland, good evening to you. Thanks for your time. Of course, this is an area that just by virtue of you having been nominated as one of the potential candidates to the Phala Phala panel, that you have wide expertise about the process of potentially having to impeach a president. Do you think that we are going to be entering that terrain now, especially given what has been leaked of this report so far?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Well, we're certainly deep in the process already, because the process was triggered a couple of months back when the ATM, a small political party in Parliament, brought the motion starting the impeachment process under Section 89 of the Constitution. The first stage of that process ends today with the tabling of this report from the independent panel, who have conducted a preliminary investigation. Their task is to assess whether there is sufficient evidence of either a serious violation of the law or serious misconduct by the president.
When we talk about impeachment, how different is this process from perhaps a motion that has been tabled for potential impeachment?
This is a vital question, Kathy, and I'm grateful to you for raising it, because people may well be confused about it. A vote of no confidence is a purely political, purely subjective vote in which members can offer whatever basis for their assessment that they like. It's a political vote of no confidence. In the case of Section 89, it's an objective test. There are three specific grounds. I've mentioned two of them. One is a serious violation of the law. The other is serious misconduct. And the third is, in a sense, infirmity. If someone is no longer fit and able to perform the role of president. That doesn't apply here. So those three grounds are objectively testable. There has to be tangible evidence. I'm using the word tangible here specifically because that's what former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo, who is the chair of the independent panel, said in his press conference this morning when he handed his 3-volume report to the Speaker of the National Assembly.
If we take a look at the lawmaking process, Professor Calland, that even this entire conversation has now created room for and necessitated in the country, where would you say we are? Because you're not only in a process that has to look at something in a way that has not been done in democratic South Africa, but do we even have laws that talk about what the impeachment of a president should look like?
There have been previous attempts to impeach presidents in the democratic era when Jacob Zuma was the president. It was at that time that Parliament applied its mind to exactly this question: what should be the right process? And given that it's an objective test set in terms of those three grounds for impeachment in the Constitution, it was wisely, in my view, decided that there should be a preliminary investigation to avoid the situation that political parties, opponents of a governing president or his or her party, will simply, without any real evidence, without any real basis, constantly bring impeachment proceedings when they know they cannot succeed with a vote of no confidence. And in order to avoid that, because it's a very serious and grave situation when a president is impeached, to avoid that happening on a regular basis without good foundation, it was decided to have this preliminary phase of the process where an independent panel of fit and proper people look at the evidence carefully and decide, is that basic threshold satisfied? Is there enough evidence to proceed?
It sounds to me that the bar then to actually try and meet out that criteria is quite high, especially when it comes to then evaluating the evidence. Does it have to be that excruciating, though? And what then would differentiate it from a court process? Because, again, at the end of the day, this is not a trial.
Well, one of the, I think, mistakes that people have made in the last couple of months is by referring to this process or the independent panel's responsibility as being one related to the question of whether there is a prima facie case, Latin word meaning is on the face of it there enough evidence to proceed. And that's the test often used for a criminal investigation to trigger the arrest and then the charging of a defendant, of a criminal. That's not the case here. As I argued in the media, and I'm suggesting to you now, Kathy, it's a higher bar for this process. Sufficient evidence of serious misconduct or serious violation of the law. Sufficient evidence means that there is real and tangible evidence that the panel has looked at, tested, and as far as possible made findings of. And indeed the process for reaching that determination is also instructive here. The panel has a duty to receive evidence from any member of Parliament, because this is a parliamentary process, and then, having received such submissions, evidence or allegations, to then give the President an opportunity to respond. And that's what happened here. And I've got sight of the President's response. It's a long response, a very detailed response, and he's basically said that there is no serious violation of law and no serious misconduct. In fact, he said he's done nothing wrong whatsoever, and that the allegation, the evidence that's been laid against him is either irrelevant or it misses the mark entirely.
What happens if the panel comes out to say, we don't actually believe that there is a case here to be answered to, and then you have the law enforcement agencies that come up with something different? That conflict, how is that going to be managed?
Well, legally, it may sound ridiculous, but legally there wouldn't necessarily be a conflict because of this word serious. Just because, and I'm not suggesting this is the case, may well not be the case, but if the President has committed a violation of law or some misconduct, the question is it serious enough to trigger the continuation of the impeachment proceedings? That's one thing. But equally, under the law, he could be prosecuted or brought to book in relation to that misconduct or violation, even if it's not serious. So there's two very separate legal processes, two separate legal tests in relation to both. I think it's quite unlikely, that scenario I've just painted. It's possible, but it seems to me quite unlikely. And certainly on the version of the events and the President's response to what happened in relation to that theft, that robbery at his farm in February 2020, it would seem that there is no concern at all on the President's behalf. But of course that's his version of events, and we wait to see exactly how the panel, the independent panel, has looked at the evidence, looked at the President's response and made their findings. We await that report later this evening.
So Richard, sorry to come in there. Just to be clear, effectively, it will all hinge on the seriousness of the crime. So if whatever the President is being accused of, if he is, charged on those matters, if it is not seen as a serious crime, is it unlikely then that it could come back to Parliament and raise the very same question that we're dealing with now?
I would anticipate that given Sandile Ngcobo's wisdom and his experience as Chief Justice and his reputation as a great jurist, I would expect that his report and the report of the independent panel that's been tabled this morning and which will publish this evening, I would expect that he will set out how he interprets these words that you and I are discussing: sufficient evidence of serious misconduct, serious violation. I expect him to explain that and interpret that and then apply it, of course, to the evidence and the facts before him. And that's very important for the public to have for this process to have credibility, for the public to be able to trust it. And as you say, Kathy, it's possible that a separate process involving the Hawks or the police or the Forex exchange control authorities and so on might reach a different verdict in relation to whether there is a breach of the law, but unless it's serious, it cannot lead to impeachment.
Professor Richard Calland, let me thank you for your time tonight and that analysis.